Hi, and welcome back to PDA UK. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at more the mental health side of things. And this is in relation to a situation we've experienced with my daughter recently, where we know now there's more than autism alone going on. So she's still autistic, but there is still more going on, and we're starting to pick away the layers on that. So that's what we're going to be discussing in this episode. So to say, welcome back to PDA UK. Before we go on any further, do just hop on, hit like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so that you know when we've got new content coming up. There's stacks of new stuff coming up and some very, very exciting interviews coming up as well, which I can't say too much about at the moment, but they're on their way. So we recently had a situation with my daughter, and I've got to be careful how I talk about it because I don't want to be unfair to my daughter and reveal too much, but at the same time, there's some really important stuff that's happened. As I've discussed on previous episodes, what's happening with my daughter at the moment is she's actually hitting adolescence. So there's a thing with autism which is quite common, which is early onset puberty. And although my daughter's quite young, she's starting to go through the process of becoming an adult and bodily changes and all that kind of stuff. And of course you get the, being a girl, you get the whole monthly side of things and the emotional roller coaster that is. And this kicked in with us about a month ago. We had a situation where I was away with the Grumpy Gits, keynote speaking at NADEX conference. And while I was there, my daughter hit her monthly and then fell into this really aggressive, out there way of being and was attacking everybody. And it was a real cause for concern, to the point that we had to make the decision in the end to get her into hospital. Now, this is an interesting one because we didn't want her to be in hospital, but what we had to do is make a decision based on her safety and everybody else's safety as well. And it was ultimately decided that was the best thing to do. And it actually turned out to be an absolute blessing in disguise. It was a really, really good disguise. But what's happened since is really interesting. And this is really where I want to lay the focus. So what I wasn't aware, well, I was kind of aware of, but wasn't aware to the degree to which this is the case. When you go through A&E or you go in through the hospital, it triggers immediate action by a lot of people. So we immediately had a CAMS worker working with us. We immediately had a child psych referred to, and a whole load of sort of stuff that came away from that. Now, we've been asking for a child psych for a long time because we are concerned about my daughter's mental health. The way she sometimes speaks about herself and the actions she wants to take can be really alarming and disconcerting. And we obviously care so much about her. We don't want to see her come into any harm of any description or harm anybody else. And so it became a real issue of concern, and we were continually prompting to hopefully get some support in this area and help her to understand what's going on in her own head. The actions that have followed have been remarkable, and stuff that we've been asking for years is suddenly happening. So as I say, she's now under a child psych, which means that there's somebody who is a professional and understands more about this stuff actually starting to peel away the layers. And CAMS, we seem to have found the world's best CAMS worker because she's just amazing. She's trying very hard to get a lot of stuff put in place that we've been begging for years. Things like occupational therapists to come in and do a sensory assessment to check on, different options that there could be in the house to help my daughter maintain her sensory overloads and things like that. But also within the school, it will bleed over into that, and maybe what options can be taken there. All stuff that really should have happened a long time ago that just hasn't. And it's letting our kids down. And I've strongly felt it's been letting my daughter down for a long time. So all this kicked in because we took her into the hospital, and because this stuff kicked over and there was suddenly a need to address the issues that are there in a much more confronting way. It seems to have made all the difference. Now, something I've spoken about previously is that my daughter hears voices. So you'll see there's an episode I've done previously on, if your kids are hearing voices, what that can be. And it's actually a common part of autism. So a lot of autistic people will hear a voice, but it's basically to sort of summarize it, it's the process of, for myself, I have an internal monologue that's going on in my head where, you know, I might think something and it's just me thinking things, but my daughter's brain kind of misinterprets that and it sees it as another voice or hears it as another voice, and it takes on its own sort of character, if you like. But it's a bit like talking to yourself. We've known that for quite some time, and you know, I was blessed in that I was able to talk to some actually autistic friends who themselves get this experience, and they were able to say, yeah, it's really common, we get that, it's okay, here's some ways to deal with it. And that was such a help to me. What we're now discovering is that there's more going on. So what we thought was a voice has now become a number of voices that are sort of going on in there, and that's obviously a real concern. There's something that needs to be addressed there, and it's obviously something well beyond my ability to understand and relate to, because it's not something I experience myself, and it needs that professional input. It's really important that we've been able to do that and unpick these things, because so often there's more going on than simply being autistic. Now, we knew this already because obviously my daughter's autistic, but she's also PDA. She's also got sensory processing disorder. She's also ADHD. And, you know, all these things are going on. They're what are called co-morbid diagnosis. So it's other things that accompany autism. And it's sort of almost like a flow chart almost. It's like autism, or maybe better thought is like one of those circular charts where in the center you've got autism, and then surrounding it you've got these different comorbid diagnoses that you often accompany autism. So very often autism is accompanied by ADHD, very often it's accompanied by sensory processing disorder. There are so many things like, you know, PCAR, and there's just a whole list of, you know, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all this stuff that generally surrounds the core of autism. And it's so common, and these things can also exist on their own without being autistic. However, there seems to be a heavy proportion of autistic people who will have these other diagnoses that accompany being autistic. And, you know, that's so important to know and be able to address those things separately, and be able to, you know, if I want to help my daughter, and I truly do, the best thing I can do is know exactly what she's dealing with so that I can help support her through those things. And as I said before, it's meeting her where she's at, not trying to make her fit into my neurotypical perspective, but actually trying to put myself in a neurodiverse perspective as much as I humanly can, being neurotypical, but actually, you know, meet her where she's at, not expect her to meet me where I'm at. What really got me was that all this stuff is sort of coming into play only because we reached crisis point. This is a big criticism I have of the whole mental health service as it is. And we talked about this before, but not in so much detail, I guess. But there is a real issue with the diagnosis process and the support process that's behind getting support for mental health. We are in a system that relies on reaching crisis. Now, we had an interesting scenario a little while back where one of my family members was feeling really low and knew that they were on a pathway to somewhere that's really negative. So they were thinking of doing something that would have been harmful to themselves. To their credit, what they did was pick up the phone and actually spoke to the crisis team, reached out to the crisis team. The response from the crisis team was, well, you're not there yet, so we can't actually help. And this wasn't something they were happy about. They would have liked to have helped, but they have a criteria they have to fulfill that comes from all these, you know, external sources and regulations and bureaucracy. Essentially what it's like saying is that because the knife was on the table and not in their hand, they couldn't help. The knife had to be in the hand. Because we hadn't reached the total point of crisis, they were unable to intervene. And we have a system that is like this. It's not until there's absolutely no any other option that support is actually given. And it's so backward thinking. And, you know, it all comes back to budgets and governments and all this kind of stuff. And it drives me insane because it's so backward thinking. Because if we were to reach people before they reach the point of crisis, surely that's going to help ease the pressure on the mental health system. You know, if we're not dealing with people who are at such a point where they've reached crisis and they're considering self-harm or worse, then if we can prevent getting to that, then it's surely going to save the system money, because we're not having to go into the extra costs of having to maybe potentially hospitalize people, section people, get people, you know, on all sorts of powerful medications that are, you know, and I'm not against medications at all. I have a belief that if you're short in vitamin C, you take a vitamin C tablet, but I do have a problem where it's just doled out for no reason whatsoever. And, you know, this ties back into the support my daughter's now getting as a result of reaching crisis point, is that the child psych who we're seeing hates giving medications away. And I was really pleased to hear that. He doesn't like to just throw medications at the system, but he says that he could really see the need for it here. And he's put on a very mild, low-dose medication, and it's really, really helping her because her anxiety's just dropped. It's not like an antipsychotic or anything crazy like that. It's purely something that will just help her to reduce her sensory overload in a way. And, you know, it's more related to ADHD, but it just brings things into a more manageable way for her to cope with it. And she's been a different kid since she's on it. Not different kid's the wrong way to put it in a way. She's not different. She's just a lot more calm in herself, and she's not reaching that point where she's constantly melting down or lashing out because she can't cope with the internal anxiety and pressure that she's feeling. And that's come about because we reached a crisis point. So what do we do to change this? I'm not someone who's got the answers to this, other than it needs to be something that comes from the top. It needs to stop being something that is simply throwing band-aids on open wounds and actually looking to prevent the wound in the first place. So many people who have mental health issues could be so much better off if they were met before the point of crisis, before their anxieties and depression and all the things that accompany it reached a point where they were so low that they felt they had to do something to harm themselves, and you know, either as a cry for help or as just a way to escape. And it sucks, and it makes me so angry that we're at this point, and that we're dealing with governments and professionals that are prepared to have this as the system. At what point do we say there needs to be an overhaul? I want to really reach out to, you know, anybody who's listening who has power to make changes like this. Listen to what people are saying. You know, we spend so much money invested in, you know, cures for COVID, vaccinations for COVID, cancer research, all these different kinds of things, which is absolutely right, and it's what we should be doing. But what gets put aside is the money and the productivity that needs to be put into preparing people for when they reach a crisis point in their mental health and helping them to avoid getting to that point. The more people we were supporting in that, the less people would have to respond at their lowest point. It would help people remain in work. If they're working and their anxieties and their depression is being managed and supported, then they're not getting to the point where they have to leave work because they can't manage it, or they've got to a point where they've reached a crisis. And, you know, who's that helping? It's so important. And as I say, that's really where I'm at. I hate that we're in a system where crisis has to be reached before we get support. Let's work to change this system. How do we do that? Please, I'd like to hear it in the comments. If you've had experiences like this, if you've had any kind of support that has really helped you, but also if it's got, you know, if you've reached out for support and you haven't received it until that point of crisis, what has that been like for you? Please do put it in the comments. Please do like this. Please do subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so that you know when we've got new content coming up. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, stay safe.